Antun, Head of Sub-Director at Directorate of Character and Socio-Cultural Learning at NIPA. The respected our guest speaker today, Mr. Andre, PhD, from the University of Chicago, our moderator, Mrs. Nayu, from School of Administration of NIPA, Jakarta, and all participants of the ASN Talent Academy 2025. Welcome to the fourth webinar series of the ASN Talent Academy 2025, which is organized by NIPA with the theme Artificial Intelligence on May 8, 2025. Before the presentation session, I will read some rules of the webinar today. Please rename your account with the format name _ institution. Activate your camera during the webinar event. Do not active your microphone unless you are allowed to. Use the virtual background specified by the committee and fill out the attendance form, which will be shared in the chat room. So ladies and gentlemen, we arrive at the main session of the webinar today. The AI material will be presented by Mr. Andre, PhD, from University of Chicago, and will be guided by Mrs. Nayu. So for the speaker and moderator, we respectfully invite you, please.
Well, very good morning here in Jakarta, and I would like to say good day, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the time and opportunity given to me. Thank you, the MC and the committee of this webinar. The Honorable Bapak Denny Junanto, PhD, Director of Character and Socio-Cultural Learning, NIPA, Indonesia, and our esteemed speaker, Andre Ol, PhD, from the University of Chicago, United States. Our tourist participants, talents from various backgrounds and institutions come across Indonesia. Welcome to today's webinar on public trust and ethical concern in the deployment of artificial intelligence in public services. This webinar is organized and hosted by National Institute of Public Administration, NIPA Indonesia, as part of National Capacity Building and Interactive Learning Program called ASN, or Public Servant Talent Academy 2025. Thank you very much. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Ratnayu Prasetyanti. Nayu is my nickname. I am one of lecturers in NIPA School of Administration, Jakarta campus, assistant professor of Public Administration Department. Well, I will be taking my role today as moderator. Before we begin, let me quickly remind you, all the participants, to mute the microphone, and please turn on the video to get a good overview of today's webinar. The session will be recorded, and you can rewatch the recording on the YouTube channel of Lembaga Administrasi Negara. And we welcome any questions. As being reminded by the MC previously, please, you can just drop your question in the chat box or in the Q&A function during the presentation. And I think we all understand that we need to keep silent during the speaker's presentation. And we will have absolutely Q&A session after the live presentation. Well, I think everything is clear. Let me welcome our esteemed speaker, our distinguished expert in AI, ethics, and governance. I welcome you, Dr. Ul. Can I call you that way? Yes, good evening there in Chicago.
Thank you, and good morning in Jakarta to everyone.
Yeah, yes. It's I'm so sorry for the time difference. It's warm here and it's very cold there. Okay,
Yes, it's
Chicago.
unfair.
Yes, Chicago is very well known by its, windy city. Yeah,
Exactly.
it must be windy there.
You are very right.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us, an expert, like I said before, in the field of AI ethics and governance, Dr. Old works are remarkable. Before joining the University of Chicago, he earned his PhD at Harvard University. He was a founding member of the Council of Extended Intelligence and co-chair of the Sustainable Peace Working Group. His research has informed the development of international AI governance, for example, through the IEEE Standards Association, as well as AI strategies of social impact hubs across the Asia Pacific regions. Okay, this is the short information about our respected speaker. Well, concerning the topic, Dr. Ul is about to share insights on balancing innovation with ethical consideration as governments increasingly deploy the AI system in public services. I think it's very important and crucial how to be responsible using AI in our professional, academic, even daily life activities. Most importantly, we are public servant, you know, it has big impacts in our public decision-making process. Well, without any further delay, I invite Dr. Ul to share his insight. Maybe it is about 30 minutes or more to present your material. And then, like I said before, ladies and gentlemen, you can still deliver questions or opinion through the chat box, but we have to wait until the presentation ends to continue the live Q&A session. Okay, the virtual floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you to everyone who invited me and made this event happen. It's a pleasure to be here. I know that there are more than 200 participants currently, 243. Unfortunately, I cannot get to know all of you individually, but a big warm welcome to all of you. It is nice to meet you, and I hope that this presentation will be useful as you are chartering your own path through the future with AI. So I will be sharing my screen now. And let's get started. So my name is Andre Uhl. I'm a postdoctoral scholar at the University of Chicago, specifically at the Harris School of Public Policy, where my work focuses on the ethics and governance of artificial intelligence. And over the last 10 years, I have been closely involved in shaping the discourse, both as a scholar and an educator, but also as a policy advisor. And I can tell you that it is a discourse that has evolved rapidly and often quite dramatically during that time. For many decades, the dominant narrative around technology was that innovation almost always leads to social progress, that disruption is desirable, and that more data and more automation can naturally lead to better outcomes. But in the last decade, we have seen a shift. And I'd like to call this a shift from techno-optimism to techno-awareness. It's a recognition that disruptive technologies such as AI can also cause harms, especially if they are not complemented by mindful governance. So today I want to offer three things. First, I would like to provide a brief orientation. What do we actually mean when we talk about the governance of AI? Second, I will highlight some of the most significant ethical challenges that we have encountered. And then finally, in the Q&A session following my talk, I look forward to thinking together with all of you about how these ethical considerations intersect with public sector innovation. What does responsible AI look like in a public context? And how can ethical reflection support innovative, effective, and inclusive public service? So I'd like to begin my lecture with this image. It's an image that's especially meaningful to me because this artifact that you see here is located at the entrance of the School of Public Policy where I currently teach. What you see here is the so-called doomsday clock. It's an artifact that resembles a conventional clock, but instead of tracking time, it tracks humanity's proximity to self-inflicted catastrophe. If this clock strikes midnight, this symbolizes a moment of global disaster, and the number of minutes and seconds before midnight represent the level of existential risk we are facing at a given moment. So each year, this clock is being adjusted in a public event, which includes leading experts from various scientific fields, and these come together to decide whether that clock should move forward, backward, or remain unchanged. And earlier this year, the clock was adjusted to just 89 seconds to midnight. It is the closest it has ever been. And that decision reflects growing concerns that we may be accelerating into futures we are not fully prepared to govern. Importantly, the Doomsday Clock is maintained by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which is a public awareness and outreach organization that was established here at the University of Chicago in 1945 by several scientists that had worked on what was known as the Manhattan Project, so a US research initiative during the Second World War that led to the development of the first nuclear weapons. It brought together some of the most brilliant scientific minds of the time, but when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, several of those scientists became deeply alarmed by what their work had enabled. What's significant is that over the decades, the Bulletin Science and Security Board has taken into account a wider and wider set of threats in determining how this doomsday clock should be adjusted. What started primarily with a focus on threats posed by nuclear weapons now also includes threats posed by climate change, pandemics, and most importantly, emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. So as we turn to the topic of AI ethics today, especially in the context of public sector innovation, I want to invite you to hold this image in the back of your mind, not as a prediction, but rather as a provocation, because it allows us to ask, what kind of future are we building with AI? And more importantly, who gets to decide? And before we can talk meaningfully about the ethics of AI, we also need to ask a more foundational question. What is actually artificial intelligence? It seems to be a simple question, and I believe most of us have a mental image when we hear the term. Often it's not a very precise one, actually. Our understanding of AI is frequently shaped by cultural imaginaries. These could be robots, humanoid agents, machines that somehow think like we humans do. And these images are powerful, but they can also be misleading. They tend to blur the lines between fiction and actual technological capabilities. So to understand AI more clearly, I think it is helpful to return to one of the historical starting points of the field, which is the Dartmouth Workshop of 1956. So the Dartmouth Workshop was a seminal summer research project that was held at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire in 1956. It was organized by a group of scientists who came from a range of disciplinary backgrounds: mathematics, computer science, cognitive psychology, electrical engineering, and they also came from some of the leading research institutions in the United States at that time, including MIT, Princeton, IBM, Bell Labs. And these scientists proposed a bold idea that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. Yeah, let me repeat this one more time because it is a really striking idea. The founding members of the Dartmouth Workshop proposed that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. This quote became something like a founding ethos for AI as a research program. And what it shows is that the idea wasn't necessarily to create thinking machines in a more literal sense. Instead, it was to take what scientific communities at that time were beginning to define as intelligence, that is, the measurable aspects of human cognitive capacities, such as learning, problem solving, and reasoning, and break those into quantifiable components that could, at least in theory, be simulated by machines. So in other words, the boldness of this proposal wasn't in imagining intelligent machines. It was in redefining intelligence itself as a concept, as something that could be formalized and quantified and ultimately simulated. And that move to make intelligence legible to machines would go on to shape decades of research, policy, and commercial development of AI. What is established, in essence, is a computational approach to intelligence. And while you can imagine it left out many of the messier and less measurable aspects of human intelligence, including emotion, intuition, and other forms of more tacit knowledge, it also created a powerful research agenda. It invited scientists to build systems that didn't need to be intelligent in the human sense. They only needed to appear to act intelligently based on structured inputs and later data-driven inference. So part of what inspired this early vision of AI was a thought experiment that was proposed just a few years earlier by the British mathematician Alan Turing. And this thought experiment is now widely known as the so-called Turing test. Turing imagined a simple setup. There was a human judge that engages in a text-based conversation with two unseen participants. One of those participants would be a human, and the other would be a machine. So here in this image, you can see the judge standing in front of these two chat interfaces. And behind those interfaces, both human and machine are hidden. Now, the judge's task is to determine, based purely on written responses, which of the two is the human. If the judge is unable to determine which respondent is the human and which is the machine, then the machine is said to have passed the Turing test. So this was known as an imitation game, and it captured a key idea that intelligence could be evaluated not by how a system works internally, but by how it behaves externally, how convincing it is in simulating human interaction. Yeah. So this early framing continues to shape much of the ethical dilemmas that we're facing with AI today, even as our own definitions of AI and the systems that we build to realize it have grown far more complex. And as we'll see, the history of AI itself has not followed a straight path. Since those early days, AI has developed in waves. These were periods of intense optimism and investment, which were then often followed by drawbacks and what came to be known as AI winters, when funding and interest diminished as technical progress stalled. And yet the field has continued to evolve, as you can see, and over time we've witnessed major breakthroughs that have redefined what machines are capable of. The third wave that we're currently in centers on an approach to AI called machine learning. This is fundamentally different from earlier methods because instead of programming rules by hand, we now train algorithms to learn from data. It's less about hard-coded logic and more about finding statistical patterns that let machines generalize from examples. So as I mentioned, we're currently in the third wave of AI development, which has been catalyzed by a convergence of various factors, which are both technical, but also social and infrastructural. Yeah. First and foremost, the birth of the internet fundamentally changed the landscape. It enabled global data sharing, continuous connectivity, and real-time interaction across networks. And this infrastructure laid the foundation for what would become an explosion of digital information, so-called proliferation of data on a scale previously unimaginable. So this digital abundance, so to say, catalyzed also the development of data-driven approaches to AI. And along the way, several milestone moments captured public attention and redefined the way we are perceiving the capabilities of intelligent systems. First of all, in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov This was a landmark achievement, especially in symbolic computation. Then in 2011, IBM's Watson won the game show Jeopardy and demonstrated impressive performance in natural language processing and information retrieval. And then most recently, in 2016, AlphaGo, which was developed by DeepMind, beat one of the world's best Go players. Unlike chess, Go games require not only logical strategy, but also a kind of intuitive pattern recognition. And many believe this would remain uniquely human for decades. But as you can tell, each of these breakthroughs marked a turning point in how we understand machine capabilities. They challenged assumptions about the limits of algorithmic reasoning and also creativity and even intuition. Now, most recently, and I think that you all have been experiencing this in your own lives, we've seen another leap, the emergence of large language models. These systems are capable of generating coherent text, translating between languages, composing code, and even passing recently university entrance exams and legal bar tests. Here's a screenshot of The Guardian, a UK-based newspaper, that published a couple of years ago an article that was entirely written by an early version of ChatGPT. And at that time, it was groundbreaking. And just a few years later, as we are arriving in our current time, it is actually quite ubiquitous. Yeah, which brings us back to a crucial point. These models are capable of simulating understanding with increasing sophistication, and those simulations can have very real effects in social and educational and legal and governmental contexts. So as these systems grow more capable, they increasingly appear to confirm our long-standing cultural beliefs of AI, that AI is an intelligent agent, a human-like mind, a technology that can think, reason, or even understand. In other words, the more sophisticated their outputs become, the more easily they seem to fulfill the vision first laid out in Turing's imitation game, that intelligence can be simulated so convincingly that it deceives the human user. And this is important to acknowledge because it tells us that public understanding of AI is not only shaped by technical achievements, it is also shaped by metaphor and by language and by expectation. This is why in the next part of this talk, I want to introduce an alternative metaphor for making sense of AI. It's a metaphor that has been introduced by the field of AI ethics, and it will shift our perspective away from performance towards issues of structure and power. That metaphor is the black box. So it is very different from an intelligent agent. A black box in the context of critical AI studies refers to a system whose internal workings are hidden or inaccessible. Yeah, the concept emerged from a basic but profound observation. Once a technology becomes widespread, accepted, and trusted, we tend to stop questioning how it actually works. Its internal logic becomes taken for granted. It's almost like a magician who shows us tricks that we cannot scrutinize. We are stopping asking how the technology is doing what it does, and we begin to accept its outcomes as self-evident. So to summarize, the black box problem here is that we can observe inputs and outputs, but not how decisions are made inside. And this is especially relevant in the case of artificial intelligence. Because many of today's AI systems, particularly massive machine learning models, are effectively black boxes. They produce decisions, classifications, or predictions, but they rarely explain their reasoning. And in many cases, even the developers of these systems cannot fully account for how a given output was produced. So when these systems are deployed in high-stakes contexts, such as education, policing, healthcare, or welfare, this opacity becomes a serious ethical concern. Let me show you why it can be a concern by opening this black box just a little bit. So what I would like to unpack with you here is a basic pipeline of algorithmic decision-making. It's a simplified representation of the various stages through which many of today's AI systems move in order to make decisions. especially when they're designed to automate or assist in our decision-making. So let me walk you through each step. First of all, we have data collection, right? In technical terms, this means it's the stage where raw information is gathered for the system to use. This might include anything that captures measurable input about the domain the system is designed to work in. The data at this point is unstructured and can be messy, and it is not yet ready to be used by a model, but it's the foundation for everything that follows. This is what leads us to the next step, data pre-processing. So once the data has been collected, it needs to be cleaned and prepared. At this stage, the data might be corrected for errors, converted into some standard formats, or labeled so that the system can read it properly. This pre-processing stage helps make sure the system is learning from consistent and structured information. And then we move into model design and training. So this is the stage where you feed the pre-processed data into an algorithm. So a set of mathematical rules based on which the data should be analyzed. And then the system adjusts itself based on what it recognizes. Over time, it starts to identify statistical patterns or relationships from the data that help it make predictions. It's not memorizing specific examples, but it's trying to generalize from them so that it can apply what it learned to a new case later. And this is then what happens in the inference stage. Once the model has been trained, it's ready to be used. Inference is what we call the process of giving the model a new input and getting a prediction or recommendation in return. This is where the system is doing its job. It's applying what it has learned from the data we gave him to make a decision about something it hasn't seen before. And this can then result in decision implementation. After the model makes a prediction or gives a result, that output is used to make a decision. Yeah? Sometimes the decision is automated, and sometimes it can also be passed to a human who makes the final call. Either way, this is the point where the result of the system enters the real world and produces consequences. Now, in the last step, we can also look at feedback and monitoring. This is the stage where we can potentially observe how the system is performing. We might be able to update it if necessary and keep track of how things change over time. We can ask, is the model accurate? Are the signs there that there might be potential errors? Is the model still aligned with its original purpose? These are all questions that we can ask in this feedback and monitoring stage, which is very essential for making sure the system stays effective and fair. So this is the basic architecture of an automated decision-making pipeline in a very simplified way. And now that we have walked through each step, we can also begin to ask a more layered question. Not just how these systems work, but where the black box that we just discussed actually resides. Where is the black box in this pipeline here? What scholars in AI ethics have shown is that opacity doesn't exist only at the level of the algorithm. It can be found throughout the pipeline so that each stage in itself can be a black box. When we look at data collection, at first glance, this might seem straightforward. It's just gathering information, right? But in practice, this is already one of the least transparent stages. We can ask, who decides what data gets collected in the first place? What kinds of information are left out? Maybe because they are hard to measure or because they're not considered relevant. What contexts get stripped away in the process? This is part of the process that is often entirely invisible, and yet it sets the foundation for everything that follows. The same applies to the pre-processing stage. Yeah, the stage where selected data are cleaned and formatted and prepared for model training. There are decisions that must be made about how categories are defined, how missing or messy data is handled, and how ambiguous cases are simplified. So I want to point out that these are all not neutral steps. They involve choices that determine how the model understands the world. But most of the time, they are done behind the scenes. And there's almost never documentation or public oversight. And then in the middle, we arrive at what's often seen as the core of the black box of AI, which is the actual model training. Especially with complex systems like deep learning models, we quickly reach a point where not even the developers can fully explain how a model produces a given output. So this is where we encounter what some scholars call epistemic opacity. We cannot scrutinize what the model is doing because it often doesn't offer an interpretable explanation. It just gives us a result in the end. Yeah, and when we get to the prediction phase, we finally see an output. Again, it could be a label, a score, a recommendation, whatever we are designing this AI model for. But even though this result is visible, the reasoning behind the result, it often isn't because of what I just explained, right? Especially users don't usually get to see how the model arrived at that outcome, what the intermediate steps were, or what its level of certainty might be. And at the point where the model's output becomes a decision or feeds into one, things can get especially murky. So we can ask, is the decision now fully automated? Is a human involved in weighing different options? If so, what role are they exactly playing? Is there real oversight? Even more importantly, if something goes wrong, if the system makes a wrong recommendation, who is responsible actually? In many real-world systems, the lines of accountability at this stage are very vague. And when that happens, transparency tends to erode quickly. And last but not least, we come to the monitoring and feedback stage, right? Ideally, this is where decisions could be tracked and outcomes could be reviewed and models could be updated to correct for errors or shifts in the real world. But in reality, this part of the pipeline is often the most neglected because we need to ask, how can decisions be audited? Can users challenge them? Is the system updated over time? In many cases, even regulators struggle to get access to these processes. And for everyday users, this part of the system might as well not exist at all. So again, if we step back here and look at the whole pipeline, what do we actually see? We can say that the earlier in the pipeline a choice is made, the more invisible it tends to be in the long run. It's kind of the trickle-down effect. Yeah. So those early decisions about what data to collect, how to pre-process them, and how to train a model, they often have the most significant influence in how an AI system behaves downstream. So now you might say, but why is opacity actually a problem, especially in the use of AI in public services? After all, AI systems are widely regarded to outperform human decision makers in many areas. They can be faster, they can be more consistent, and in some cases, they can also be more accurate. That's exactly why AI is seen as a transformative tool, with the potential to revolutionize how we understand complex problems and also deliver public services more efficiently. So if an AI system potentially performs better than a human decision maker, isn't that enough? So I would say not necessarily. Because what we need to acknowledge is that in the public sector, accuracy alone is not the only benchmark. We also need to consider that transparency, fairness, and accountability matter equally. And that's the core tension here. What you just have seen in this pipeline is that we can build systems that are impressively good at solving tasks, but that still don't explain themselves in human terms. That becomes a serious issue when the system is used to make decisions that affect people's lives. If we cannot trace how a decision was made, we also lose our ability to question, challenge, or appeal that decision. So the lack of transparency limits oversight, not necessarily because the system is not performing accurately, but because it was never designed to explain itself. And what it means is that if we embed AI into public services without explainability, we also risk creating structures that are efficient but unaccountable. Yeah. And here we are actually arriving at AI as not being necessarily only a technical issue. If we want to approach the ethics of AI more comprehensively, we also need to approach it as an institutional issue as well. This is why ethics has emerged as a central paradigm, in the governance of AI. And so now I want to introduce you actually to some of the core principles that have emerged in the space of AI ethics, because it is not an abstract thought experiment. In fact, the field of AI ethics has largely taken shape in response to specific and highly visible moments. There were cases where systems failed to meet the demands of things like transparency, fairness, and accountability. And cases that make clear that technical success is not enough if it comes at the cost of public trust. So let me show you 3 of such moments, each of which catalyzed a deeper reckoning with what it means to use AI responsibly. So one of the earliest and most defining concerns in the ethics of AI has been the issue of transparency, particularly in relation to data collection. Many of the most powerful AI systems rely on massive data sets that are harvested from everyday digital activity, often without clear user consent or public awareness. I mentioned before that in our current third wave of AI, we see it being catalyzed by the emergence of the internet several decades ago, and the ability to harvest massive amounts of data from users who are navigating the internet. And this dynamic is sometimes referred to as surveillance capitalism. It's a system in which personal data is extracted, commodified, and used to predict or shape human behavior. And this kind of issue has become central, not just in terms that users are unaware of what data is being collected, but it's that they have little ability to understand or contest how that data is used. The consequences actually are profound. Non-transparent data practices can enable the manipulation of individual and collective opinion. They can distort public discourse, and they can undermine the autonomy of users and citizens alike. This is what a lot of scholarship in the field has shown over the last decade. And in the public sector context, this opacity poses a serious challenge to democratic governance. When data systems operate without transparency, we also lose the ability to ensure that technological infrastructures are aligned with public values, or even to know when that alignment is breaking down. A second watershed moment that I would like to introduce here came from the question of fairness, and particularly how algorithmic systems reproduce or amplify social bias. The photo that you see here is from a groundbreaking project called Gender Shades, which has been led by a researcher called Joy Buolamwini, who tested commercial facial recognition systems from major tech companies and found that they consistently misclassified darker-skinned and female faces at much higher rates than lighter-skinned and male faces. In this picture, you see her actually having to wear a white mask in order to be recognized by a facial analysis tool at that time. What was the reason behind that? The study found that the training data sets that were used to build these systems were overwhelmingly skewed. They were underrepresenting women and people of color. In other words, the systems learned what they were shown, right? What was fed into this automated decision-making pipeline we just explored. So they learned what they were shown, and what they were shown was a narrow and biased view of the world that was embedded in the data set itself, which excluded vast portions of the population. So fairness in AI is not just about individual errors. It's about structural exclusion. It's about question who gets represented, who gets misclassified, and who gets left out entirely. And when these systems are deployed in public services, whether that is for identity verification, for eligibility screening, or even for law enforcement, these biases are no longer theoretical. They shape access to resources, services, and legal protections. And in this sense, unfair AI doesn't just create inefficiencies. It rather risks hard coding inequality into the very systems that are meant to serve the public. Lastly, the third and defining issue that I want to discuss is accountability, especially when decisions made by AI systems have physical consequences in the world. And there are a few cases that made this clearer than the early accidents that involved autonomous vehicles. So when a self-driving car causes harm, such as a car crash, we have to ask the question, who is actually responsible here? Is it the manufacturer of the car? Is it a software developer of the AI system that has been deployed in this? Is it a human driver? Or is it the AI model itself? These questions have no simple answers, and they highlighted a critical gap between automated action and legal and moral responsibility. In public services, the stakes are just as high. When an AI system flags someone as ineligible for benefits, or it identifies a person to be at risk, or it prioritizes one application over another, who is actually accountable for that decision, and how do we ensure there is a meaningful way to scrutinize and challenge it if necessary? So these three cases here that I have just shown remind us that building effective and ethical AI is not just about making systems that work. It's actually more about designing systems that can be governed and contested and ultimately held responsible. So in public institutions, a failure to uphold these three foundational values, that is transparency, fairness, and accountability in AI development, it would not just be a technical design flaw. It could also risk the foundations of democratic governance. So given the kinds of challenges that we've just discussed around transparency, fairness, and accountability, it is no surprise that the past decade has seen a surge in efforts to define how AI should be governed. What I'm showing you here is a study from some of my colleagues at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard, who in 2019 conducted a comparative analysis of over 30 of the most influential AI strategy documents that emerged worldwide. This project sought to map the ethical and governance principles that were beginning to crystallize across different national strategies, corporate frameworks, and civil society initiatives in different regions in the world. And what I found was a striking convergence. Across regions and sectors and institutions, many of these frameworks centered on a shared set of core principles that you can see here lined up in the middle. Principles that directly respond to the kinds of risks and failures that we've been discussing. Yeah, and if we walk through them one by one and maybe start at the bottom with the core principle of privacy. Here it's about the idea that people should know what data is being collected about them, why it's being collected, and how it's being used. And they should also have the ability to say no. That is the baseline in a democratic digital society. Secondly, we have the principle of accountability. So again, as we have seen in the case of self-driving cars and accidents that they may cause, when an AI system makes a decision, especially one with serious consequences, we need to be able to trace that decision back to someone who can explain it and take responsibility for it. Then we have the issue of safety and security. These documents propose that AI systems should be tested rigorously before deployment, especially in high-risk settings. That means anticipating failures and protecting against misuse so that these systems don't behave unpredictably in the real world, basically to mitigate issues before they become an issue, right? Then we have the issue of transparency and explainability. Again, people affected by AI decisions should be able to understand why a decision was made. It doesn't mean exposing source code. It means more that we need to provide a meaningful explanation that makes sense to a human who is impacted by this decision. Next, we see also fairness and non-discrimination here emerging, which emphasizes again that AI shouldn't produce systematically worse outcomes for some groups over others. That means checking for biased data, biased algorithm design, and biased impact, and doing something about it. And this all plays into the idea that we need to establish new ways for human control of technology. Even if a system is automated, there should always be a human in the loop, especially when rights are at stake. And there are many methodologies that are emerging to explain how that can be done. Someone must be able to intervene or override or to stop the system when necessary. This is then a matter also, if we move next up to professional responsibility. Yeah. When developers and policymakers in institutions deploy AI, it is important to understand the broader impact of the work. It's not just whether the model performs, but whether it is doing any kind of harm. And this is because what ultimately here is at the top of this hierarchy is a promotion of human values. At the end of the day, AI should support things we collectively as a society care about. And that's the measure of alignment and not just efficiency. So taking together all of these principles that emerged across many of those landmark documents at that time, they offer more than just a checklist. They actually represent an emerging consensus that the governance of AI is fundamentally a human rights issue. In other words, if we fail to govern AI wisely, so if we treat it only as a technical tool rather than a social and political force, we also risk undermining the very values our institutions are meant to uphold. And that is what makes this moment so important. It is not only a time of technological transition, it is a test to us of how we carry democratic governance and human rights into the digital era. And to ground some of these principles we've just discussed in the practical work of governance, I'd like to share two initiatives that I have been directly involved in through my work with the IEEE Standards Association. For context, the IEEE is the world's largest technical professional organization. It has over 400,000 expert members in more than 1,200 active global hubs, many of which are also in Indonesia. And the IEEE is primarily known for shaping foundational technology standards. Yeah, but more recently, it has also emerged as a global leader in establishing ethical standards for AI. I have had the opportunity to participate in this shift through my work with the IEEE's Global Initiative on the Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. This began by contributing to ethically aligned design, which is now the world's largest crowdsourced global treatise on the ethics of AI that is available today. It brought together over 700 experts from 56 countries across disciplines, and is also one of the earliest documents to make sense of the ethical principles that should govern advanced AI systems. This document actually laid a foundation for a series of ongoing technical standards, the so-called IEEE P7000 series, which continue to be developed today through formal working groups. And these standards help engineers and institutions integrate ethical reasoning directly into system design from the very beginning. Yeah, they have since influenced regulatory agendas and procurement frameworks and institutional practices around the world. And the second project I'd like to highlight is the Council on Extended Intelligence, or CXI. It's a high-level working group that was hosted by the IEEE and the Harvard and MIT Ethics and Governance of AI initiative that I worked part of. And it was hosted between 2018 and 2022. This Council on Extended Intelligence basically had a mission to take these emerging principles and translate them into practical governance architectures. Yeah, the Council's work emphasized three structural pillars that were necessary for enabling ethical AI. First of all, it establishing clear guidelines for data rights so that individuals have meaningful control over how their data is used. Then second, it's embedding participatory design platforms to ensure the public is not just impacted by AI decisions, but actively shaping them through inclusive and consensus-driven processes. And then third, it's about redefining metrics of success. It's about shifting institutional incentives away from optimization toward public value, sustainability, and well-being. So this project reflected a movement to go beyond principles as aspirational ideals and think about what it means to operationalize them into institutional practices and systems-level governance. I see that many of you have raised your hands, so I will just complete my next slide and then we'll pause for some questions before moving on to the last part of my presentation. But what I just want to share here briefly is also a snapshot of one of the frameworks that we promoted through the Council on Extended Intelligence. And this kind of framework proposes a model of society in the loop machine learning, basically. It's a model for creating new institutional communication channels through which the public can also collectively shape and hold AI systems accountable. Because if we agree that AI systems affect public life, then we also have to treat their governance as a public matter. And that means building structures that bring lay citizens and not just the experts into the loop. So here on the left, we have the domain of policy and societal practices. So how problems are framed, agendas are set, and governance is enacted. Then the pillar on the right is where we have scientific and technological practice, how research questions are formulated, or systems are developed and technical discourse unfolds. And then what's often missing is the center here, the blue pillar. It's a space where the public meaning is made. So here we can begin with problem framing. We can identify issues that matter, who they affect, and what outcomes we actually want. This is where lay citizens are invited to articulate perspectives that often get left out of technical or policy discourse. That framing feeds into peer-to-peer discourse, deliberate processes where public values and views are shared and debated and made visible. This is not just consultation for the sake of optics, it's about giving voice to people's lived experience in a structured way. And from there, we move to results and application, where those public values are translated back into policy and research processes that can help shape outcomes in both AI governance and technical design. So what I want to show here is that this model is framing ethical AI, it's not just something that just depends on better models or cleaner data. Yeah, it also depends on democratic participation. It requires institutional infrastructures that make space for public reasoning and mechanisms to ensure that that reasoning feeds back into the real decisions. That means redesigning not just the algorithms, but the conditions under which algorithmic decisions are made, justified, and contested. It's about building AI literacy across society and designing governance processes that treat AI as a public matter, not just a technical one. Okay, and I will pause here because there are several questions that I want to give some space.
Okay, well, thank you for the pause. We have 13 raising hands here. I'm sorry if I didn't notice which one's first, but we have Indra Reski. Hello, Mr. Indra.
Yeah, the voice sounds well.
Yes, very well.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you before that, Andre from the University of Chicago. You're talking about AI in developed countries, especially global powers like the United States. People understand English, coding, and AI very quickly. This also you explain at your slide, the book, The Evolving Regulatory Landscape from Principles to Practice. In my opinion, AI is like a double-edged sword. On one side, it helps us work more efficiently, but on the other, it can widen the digital gap if not handled properly. We can't wait for everyone to be tech ready, but we can start with small steps, equal training, simpler language, and age-friendly approaches. Being a civil servant isn't just about completing tasks. It's also about lifelong learning. If we can build intergenerational collaboration and knowledge sharing, I believe Indonesian civil servants can also adopt and grow with AI. So my question is, how do we respond to this AI phenomenon in a way that is inclusive and fair for everyone? Meanwhile, in countries like Indonesia, especially for us, civil servant or ASN, adapting is more complex. We face challenges like age differences, digital gaps, and social inequality, especially in remote areas. maybe some of us in the Zoom call understand AI well, but some may not. And
Mhm.
and outside the Zoom, many civil servants only work to earn a salary and fulfill duties. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the fantastic input. And I would actually argue that you almost provided the answer as well in your original comment, because it directly refers to the last slide that I just showed, what it actually means to bring the general public into the loop, society into the loop, to make sense of AI. We need to find new ways to make sense of this tool together as a collective. And that starts with education, to open up possibilities for social groups across different ages to understand what AI systems are actually doing, right? There's a reason why I started my talk with a very common metaphor that AI is kind of a human-like robot or an intelligent machine, right? And many people, even in policy circles, are actually talking about AI in ways that are very human-like. But if we move away from that and really enable also broader public spheres to get a more critical understanding that AI are essentially black boxes where a lot of decision-making processes are really difficult to scrutinize. And what that means actually then also in using those tools, I think this is really a first start in enabling a broader public and a more fairer approach to mainstreaming AI. This is not to say that these tools are not very useful, but if we don't include a critical thinking that allows us also to understand the particular limitations of those tools, we will also not be able to use them to their fullest benefit, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Iwil and Indra from Sumedang. Well, we have more participants raising hand, but I think I need to just make good representatives participant like the persons coming from ministerial level. Yeah, previously we have regional government representative, and now I would like to call Zahrina Tamimi from National Institute of Public Administration. I think you need to make a on-point question. Thank
Okay,
you.
I hope my voice is clear enough for you to listen. All right. Hi,
Yes.
Dr. U.
Hello.
So thank you for your fantastic and great presentation. I really enjoyed. I'm sorry, I'm not feeling good condition, but I hope I can explain to you like super short.
Mhm.
So this morning I read about your works and I really enjoy about how you combine arts, also like your humanities side and
Mhm.
policy, and also the AI itself. But what I really want to know is, consider to what you have learned and what you have researched so far, how can you predict the human in the future after AI, like the life after AI, something like that? So how do you can maybe like a foresight about this? Because I really enjoy how you can combine this kind of diverse and really diverse perspective and also diverse background that you have. That's all. I'm sorry if it's not really related to what we have discussed today, but I think it's very rich for us to know about it. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, I love this question. Thank you for that. I mean, usually these are questions that I think, don't address often enough in policy discourse, right? We are always more occupied with making administration more efficient and evidence-based. Yet I do believe also foresight and imagination is an important part to understand the direction that we should actually guiding our governance strategies towards. And I would actually argue that there are many possible scenarios that are laying out in front of us, and it will ultimately depend on us together in decision-making positions, and then also the public, to the extent we can actually steer these outcomes towards positive values. So there are some interesting sort of trends emerging, both that are concerning and both that are also very positive. Yeah, on the concerning side, of course, we see existential risks increasing. I mentioned it in the beginning, the doomsday clock in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists are including now transformative technologies such as AI in their risk assessment. And actually, a large number of think tanks are considering existential risk as a framework to understand how we should approach the future of AI. There have been some interesting open letters which were signed by thousands of researchers around the world to propose that we should pause the development of advanced AI models that we are not fully capable of understanding or govern. So there is sort of this indication that there is a risk in advancing AI to such an extent that it will outpace our capability of keeping it in check. Yet at the same time, we can also see a lot of use value in advancing AI models in order to help us make better decisions, right? And actually, I want to talk about this also in the last bit of my presentation later, when we are looking at the use of AI, for example, in environmental governance, where more and more we are also realizing that AI systems could help us actually interpret the dynamics of complex ecological systems in a way that we as humans do not fully comprehend. So this is an exciting area that I can look into. AI more like as a translator, mediator between us and the bigger systems that we inhabit and that need to flourish in order for us to flourish, right? Also, AI is a way maybe to translate and mediate peace between different value systems. This could all be kind of imagined, but it really depends on how different governance systems are actually set up in prioritizing the development of AI. And currently, we are actually looking more into an arms race, right? An arms race that is being held by a few competing nations who have the resources and the infrastructure to develop their own AI models, primarily the United States and China. A few other regions are also planning to, become more relevant in that space, for example, the European Union. But here we will see, how kind of the agenda to be a competitive player in that space can also intersect with ethical considerations because they are usually also slowing us down and they're requiring us to think more critically before we move forward. So it is a dynamic field and there are many options and it ultimately depends on those who can make the decisions.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for the question.
Also, thank you for Zahrina with the interesting insight. Next, Dr. Oil, I think we need to give opportunity for next participants. It's Miss Ariani from our legislative sector of the government. Maybe it is interesting to get to know about the political things and AI things. Please, Miss Ariani.
Clearly. Okay, it's a pleasure to discuss with you today, and it was a great presentation of you. So, my question is, we've all learned what the positive impacts of AI, but what do you think the negative impacts of AI? Because even AI also currently being used in the academic sector, maybe like a ChatGPT. Of course, it has a various impact if it not used wisely, and the existence of AI has a high risk. For a little bit sharing for you about the case being discussed in Indonesia right now, about eye retina scans by biometric world coin. Unfortunately, many people do this because they promise but money in return. Of course, this is a dangerous situation because it can be used for personal identity or like a theft and privacy concern. Especially the situation in Indonesia right now, we don't have an AI Act that regulated. Currently, we just have regulation that related such as Electronic Information and Transaction Act. It is the different condition in Europe. Maybe there are AI Act in Europe because they have a more legal protection. And there, maybe you can share about some view or your perspective about this situation. Thank you so much.
Yes. So concerns, I mean, it plays directly into the principles that are outlined, because if they are not upheld, this is exactly where harm can be caused. I think that it is important to understand AI systems are incredibly efficient. They can make things very easy for us, right? In our jobs, we can get things done much more quickly. And also in universities, as you mentioned, we can get homework done much more quickly. And I know that many academics in my space have been struggling with how to respond to the use of AI in a meaningful way. What we have actually discussed is that we cannot make this tool go away, right? It is here and it will change the way we are learning and communicating and going about doing our work. So what we can do is actually to find ways to adapt to it and find new meaningful ways to incorporate it into our practices. And meaningful ways, they can be manifest in many different things. But maybe something that I would like to highlight here especially is a major concern that AI is going to replace a lot of humans in many decision-making roles, which also then will cause AI to replace human in livelihoods and jobs. And as long as new mechanisms aren't in place to basically to capture those humans, right? To hold them and to give them alternatives that can provide meaningful transitions, then we have a problem because suddenly we see a disruption at a scale that can bring a lot of imbalance to society, even further than we are seeing it today, right? So I think that AI can be a powerful tool if we are moving fast enough to transform the very institutions and social contexts in which we are operating so that AI doesn't replace us. That is the main thing here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There are still many participants raising hand, but I think we need to continue the presentation first, and then we go back to the question and answer session later on.
Okay, and I promise I will make it quick so that we have enough time for everybody to ask their questions. Because I want to still also highlight an important piece here, and some of you wanted to talk about this in your questions already, and it relates to what are actually the frontiers of AI governance. So where is the field currently headed, right? What I just shared previously, the emergence of AI ethics principles as a global regulatory environment. These are primarily human-centered principles, right? They prioritize or focus on the human end user or society at large, and even more broadly conceived, perhaps humanity, as the primary beneficiary of regulation, right? So we are caring about the human here and to understand what it actually means to make AI system more human-centric, yeah? But this kind of framework is not complete, even though it's foundational and remains essential, yeah? What we are starting to acknowledge in the space of AI governance is also the reality of the environmental changes that are happening around us, increasing planetary instability, which is becoming impossible to ignore. And this is where we're beginning to recognize what has long been missing from the ethical conversation, which is the environment as another stakeholder. Yeah? It's the planetary context, so non-human life and the planet. We want to expand the circle of moral concern and push beyond humanity to include the planet itself. And this shift reflects the recognition that human well-being is not separable from planetary health. Actually, it depends on it. And so the systems we build, such as AI, they are nested within broader environmental realities. So ethics cannot remain human-centered if the very conditions that sustain human well-being are destabilized. And here I want to briefly introduce three principles that have come to define a so-called second wave of AI ethics that is currently emerging and that I'm part of contributing to. So when we are thinking about AI, usually we think about, its impact on society. But a foundational concern in the second wave is actually how AI is also consuming a lot of resources. Training and running modern AI systems requires immense amounts of computational power. And that computation is supported by a global network of cloud infrastructure, data centers, that run 24/7. They draw on substantial amounts of electricity and water for cooling. So in ethical terms, the question becomes, how do we actually weigh the environmental cost of AI systems that promise efficiency and innovation? Yeah, this is where ecological interdependence begins. It's about recognizing that technological progress is never immaterial. Every smart solution is grounded in real-world resource flows. And this also has to do with resource extraction, what it takes to build the hardware behind AI. Most of today's AI infrastructure, from smartphones to servers to batteries, it all depends on rare earth minerals and other materials from the earth that are mined from specific geographies, which are often under conditions that involve environmental degradations, exploitative labor, and geopolitical tensions. So this introduces a completely different dimension of ethics. Yeah, sort of where these resources are coming from and who bears the cost of extraction. It reminds us that AI doesn't just emerge from code. It's built on a supply chain that reaches deep into the earth. And it also reaches into communities that actually sit across the digital divide. This is where we have to consider what happens at the end of an AI system's life cycle, or a device's life cycle, more specifically framed. Once devices become obsolete, we're generating enormous amounts of e-waste. Yeah, a lot of that is ending up in regions that are least equipped to manage it. Often discarded hardware is exported to countries in the global south, where it is dismantled in informal conditions that pose risks to both human health and the local ecosystems. And what is significant about this is also that it's creating a deeply uneven geography of harm. Where the benefits of AI tend to concentrate in wealthier nations, the ecological and human costs are outsourced elsewhere, and especially to populations who do not fully benefit from these technologies at all. So if we talk about responsible AI, we must also ask, how does AI's impact manifest differently depending where in the world we are living or looking at? And what does global fairness mean when the material burdens of AI are so unequally distributed? So you can see here that this is a completely different dimension of AI ethics. And I just want to highlight a brief example. I'm currently chairing a new working group at the IEEE Standards Association that specifically looks at how we can actually govern AI according to principles of Earth law. So principles that consider the environment itself as a stakeholder in governance processes. And at the same time, we also want to look at how AI can actually support environmental governance in a way that allows us in our human footprints to become more sustainable, right? It's this twofold, two-sided sword, both AI as the solution and the problem. How can we weigh trade the balances, trade the trade-offs, and what are the net positive outcomes here? So this is all an evolving field of work. And the horizon of this is basically ethical AI governance as a practice for both human and planetary stewardship, yeah, for generations to come. So to conclude, I want to return to the question that often frames how AI is understood. What is it really, right? Throughout this talk, we've been challenging the idea of AI as an intelligent agent. What we've explored today is that AI is not just a tool that can help us optimize processes, make better predictions, and increase the efficiency of public service delivery. Rather, it is more of a complex socio-technical system. It's embedded in infrastructures and institutions and cultures and supply chains, and lastly, planetary ecologies. And I think that shift in perspective, it changes everything. Yeah. AI governance cannot be reduced to isolated technical fixes. It must address the full system, the so-called extended intelligence, or XI, as we are framing it in our work, where technical, social, economic, and ecological forces are always interacting. So I would argue that the future of ethical AI is not about making machines more human. It's about making the systems that are adopting AI more just, more accountable, and more sustainable. And that's the horizon I believe we must work toward. And that is also the space, so-called between code and culture, and between infrastructure and ethics, where our governance is now evolving. Okay. And lastly, before I now open it back up to our discussion, I also want to briefly mention something. I will be actually be visiting Indonesia later this year. And for those of you who are interested in deepening your knowledge of what we've covered in today's lecture, I will offer a retreat program at the UID Creative Campus in Bali. The dates are not set yet, but if you are interested in deepening your understanding of the principles we've covered and exploring practical methodologies and tools to bring those principles into your own organization and work, please contact our program manager. I'm sharing her email address here, and I'm pretty sure she will also drop this in the chat box later on. But this is an open invitation to any one of you who would like to immerse yourself more deeply into this discourse beyond what we are able to discover in today's session. So thank you very much. And I open it back up to questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you. And then we go to the next participant. We have Nadia from Law.
Hi,
Ministry of
Andre.
Law.
Yes. Hi, Andre.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. My name is Nadia. I'm from the Ministry of Law. And for your information, my institution, the Ministry of Law, regulates about the intellectual property rights in this country. So I have a big concern about the relationship between artificial intelligence and intellectual property rights. So when AI was used to create public service announcement by the government last year, criticism from the public was aroused that the government was ignoring the contribution of creative industry players such as musician, designer, or the animators. So my question is, the first one is the use of AI by the government in this context is still ethical or not? And the second one is the AI ideally only used to speed up administrative process, not replace the creative works. What do you think about the correlation between the artificial intelligence and the intellectual property rights? Thank you.
Yes, it's an important area. Thank you for posing that question. I mean, this has been such a hot topic actually in recent years. Here in the US, we had many debates around this, especially as many people realized that ChatGPT sometimes produced outputs that were very similar to the work of some people. And there were some instances where big newspapers were trying actually to prevent large tech firms to use their articles to train their AI models, right? But it is also a very messy sort of conflict because it is not as easy to prevent that from happening. A lot of times, large-scale machine learning models, they are trained on data that are simply scraped from the internet, right? It's not like a hand-selected database. These are vast databases that involve basically a lot of autonomous, non-human web scraping in order to get as many data as possible. And so here the question is, how do you draw the line? If AI is already being in use and being established, like what kinds of laws are actually in place that would account for this new form of intellectual property violation, right? I think it is really about the legal practices that need to evolve hand in hand with those dilemmas, because as we are seeing in other cases, such as what I presented before, the case of self-driving cars, it has been shown that there is no real legal framework to account for errors that are being produced by, car crashes, for example. So these are so-called moral crumble zones, like cases that don't have really sort of a legal playing field yet. And I believe the intellectual property issue is a similar one, because there are many ways we could argue here, be it either that AI is actually paraphrasing or remixing certain content in the same way a human would do, could we develop citation requirements, that could be built into AI models, and how would that look like? I think there are a lot of questions that need to be handled in collaboration with the tech companies whose technologies we are using. And here, maybe you might be also running into certain obstacles because a lot of the AI platforms that are currently being used, they are concentrated in other jurisdictions, right? Predominantly in the United States, China, perhaps we see AI platforms emerging in other places. But it's a complex field, and there's no clear answer to this. But all I would say is that legal practices, they also have evolved in tandem with what is happening right now.
Yeah, it's still being a discussion, I think, in over the world. Like every
Yes.
government still talking that how we adapt the artificial intelligence in the intellectual property rights, because it's like a two coins that we need
Yes.
to protect the animator, the designer, the musician, and also we want to use the artificial intelligence as the next level of the digitalizations. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And as you mentioned, also the question of creativity. I think that every technology introduces a new tool that we can be creative with. But it depends on our own capacity, how we engage with this tool, and how innovative we can be with it, that will then also define the creative space. And in terms of AI, creativity must merge with also ethical consideration, because it's not only a tool that does specific things, it's a very ubiquitous tool that can do many different things that can have then real world effects, right? So here it's a different level of where creative practice actually converges with ethics.
So is it like for now, maybe we can, as a government officer, we can use the artificial intelligence to reduce the process of the business, so we can enhance the public service to the people. Is it, what do you want to say to us?
Well, what I want to say, and this comes back to my whole framework, that it is really important to create a new public discourse where we can make sense of what is happening right now. Because the question that you're asking is such a good example that this is not an easy solution at hand, right? Even as somebody like me who has been involved in that space for more than a decade, and I have seen the emergence of AI ethics and governance as a field in real time. Even at this stage right now, it is impossible to say this is the right way to go about doing things. So what needs to happen is to create consultations with various stakeholders who are impacted by those implications, right? In the terms of intellectual property, it's exactly that you're saying, the authors, the artists, but also the lawyers, the general public who would like to take advantage maybe of these tools. There are many different stakeholders that need to be coming into a room to assess like how we should actually respond to it in a way that it's reflecting a public consensus. So ethical AI governance starts by dialogue. That's how I would argue.
Okay, thank you, Andre.
Thank you for the question.
Okay, dear all participants or audience, we are going to end up the session at 11. So to the time limit, we need to make, question or opinion as short as possible. So just be on point. Next, Mr. Maulana.
Thank you for your opportunity, Ms. Nayo, and hi, Dr. Andre. I would like to ask to you about this interesting presentation, your interesting presentation. The first, in the next decade, South ASN or civil servant priorities becoming regulator or innovator or ethics in the Indonesian AI ecosystem. And so what are the major failures in global AI governance, such as the Dutch welfare scandal that solves Indonesian protection? And what are your thoughts on AI and climate change? Because AI development require a lot of energy and still use energy that is not environmental friendly? How can AI development be more environmental friendly? Can you outline to us practical steps to align this aspect, the role of civil servant or ASN that is future proof, learning from other people mistake and in that, and how AI can be developed more environmental friendly?
Thank you for
Yes.
this question. Yeah, so there was a little bit of
Okay.
background noise. Let me summarize your question to see if I understood it correctly. So the second question that you just had is the relationship between AI and sustainability, basically, how we can develop AI models that can be more efficient with the environment. And then the first question, was this about to look at the global regulatory landscape and what Indonesia could learn from that? Or what was the first question exactly about? Could you please repeat this one more time?
Okay. So we civil servant can be, in your opinion, becoming regulator, innovator, or
Anak barunya
ethics
kali
in
habis
Indonesian
pindah.
AI ecosystem. In
How,
your
how,
opinion,
okay.
the best role for civil servant.
Okay. So the
In the
question is
future,
how civil,
AI landscape ecosystem in
okay, so
Indonesia.
what civil servants can do to become the best innovators in the AI landscape? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Very good question. You know, it starts with a lot of education. I think that AI as a governance challenge, it poses questions that are not part of any kind of discipline. If you have looked at my background, and you know, one of the other participants has pointed it out already, my background is highly interdisciplinary, and so is almost everybody's within the space of AI governance. The field itself has drawn from so many different fields of knowledge that it almost turns into its own field of research, right, and expertise. And so what I want to emphasize here is to really have an open mind for a lifelong learning process where you are evolving alongside the changes that are happening around us and be flexible and adaptable in order to make decisions that correspond to any given moment. What we're exploring here, again, these are dilemmas that don't currently have a lot of easy solutions. So it requires us to be really creative in order to understand how we can draw from different insights and from different stakeholder perspectives in order to understand how we should be moving forward, right? We are building basically governance frameworks as the AI system is already here and is changing the world we are operating in. So it's kind of a real world experimentation in a way. It is unfolding all around the globe. And we will see how effective different approaches are over others. I can highly recommend for everybody who is interested in understanding sort of what are some of the benchmarks of regulatory environments in the world regarding AI. The European Union, the EU AI Act that has been already previously mentioned in the discussion. This is often considered one of the most rigorous frameworks that is available today. And it has established a risk-based approach to AI governance that is categorizing different AI applications into different risk levels, and then also tells what kinds of countermeasures should be implemented and hold those systems accountable to the public. So it's an interesting reference to look at, but I would argue that it is really important to have an open mindset and to also work from your own internal motivation. So what is it really that you actually, as an individual with your personal identity and story, want to contribute that matters to your own community, to your own life story? Because this is usually a driver for meaningful change, right? So in this retreat program that I just mentioned, this is exactly what we are doing. We're exploring sort of this personal story element as well. How does your own story also become a driver to understand what role you're playing in the AI ecosystem? So this is kind of what I would argue here. And I like that you actually mentioned or brought civil servants, public servants in contact with the term innovator, because this is exactly what's happening now. We're not anymore just maintaining administrative systems, right? We are needing a new innovation paradigm that is applicable to all sectors of profession and society, right? So we all become new innovators in the space. Then secondly, to your question about AI and climate change, it's an important one. I'm glad that you're asking it. And as I've been already sharing sort of some of the three main concerns that are currently emerging around resource consumption, resource extraction, and e-waste or pollution, it is important to start thinking about that. Around the world, it is still kind of an emerging field. So there are not a lot of examples I can share with you that could tell you what kind of solutions exist. And the reason why there are not a lot of examples yet is also because it is very difficult to understand what the actual environmental footprint of AI systems is. A lot of AI models, they are being trained on sort of infrastructures that spread across the globe, and that they have supply chains and labor chains that are not easily to trace. Yeah, and for that reason, it is also difficult to measure the true impact of AI and to understand how to make that impact transparent so that we could weigh both the benefits and the challenges or the harms that AI systems could cause, right? Because ultimately, AI can be a game changer in climate action, but only if we understand what the trade-offs are in using it and how large the environmental footprint is. This is exactly the area, that we are working on currently on the IEEE working group. And I'm happy to share more of the results once they become available, but there is just not as much global precedent yet to draw on.
Okay, thank you, Andre,
Thank you.
for your answer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Maulana. We're going to choose 3 more questions. The first question is from Sharifah Mariana. Hi, Miss Sharifah.
Yeah, hello. Is my voice clear?
Yes, hello.
Yes, okay. Okay, I'm going to ask you about the current implementation in Supreme Court of Indonesia. We have a smart majelis right now, which automatically assign judicial panel based on AI models. So, based on your presentation earlier, we need to consider that the principle of accountability, especially since the panel of judges is selected by AI in the event of problematic ruling. For example, it may become difficult in the future to question or assign responsibility regarding the composition of judicial panel. My question is, what measures should be taken to address this concern, and considering that this is actually a promising innovation to prevent like corruption or something else, injustice? And also, how is AI currently being utilized in the US Supreme Court or other high court globally? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I appreciate sort of the diversity of different areas that we're covering here. So there's a practical framework emerging that tries to counterbalance issues of transparency, fairness, accountability, right, that we already explored. And that method is called human-in-the-loop machine learning. Yeah, it's a new framework that tries to understand what it actually means to place human decision makers into different stages of an AI system's life cycle. So to have human decision makers or analysts basically evaluate the quality of the data an AI system is trained on, to evaluate sort of the accuracy or the quality of the algorithm that is being used to to cultivate a model in the end. And later also then to create an auditable oversight of the outputs that it's creating. Yeah, because a lot of times we are not able to anticipate basically when something goes wrong. Usually it only happens when harm has already occurred. So these examples that I shared previously around fairness or accountability, these were all examples where significant harm occurred already. where AI systems were already deployed and they made real-world decisions. For example, there were many instances where in the US judicial systems, AI systems were used to assess the risk of certain individuals and to understand how we should actually create an appropriate response. So a risk assessment of an individual, the risk of, for example, recommitting a crime, that is something that has been previously used in US contexts. However, also the space of AI ethics has pointed out how problematic it can be if the AI systems are not trained on fair data that represent more equally different proportions of society. And so with that, human-in-the-loop machine learning has emerged as a way to kind of counterbalance, yet this is also not an perfect method, right? There can still be issues emerging, and it is still sort of evolving in the way that we want to look at how we can actually make AI systems accountable to the extent that we can fully explain the decisions to the public, to those who are affecting them. Yeah. So I would recommend you to look into human-in-loop machine learning as a tool.
Okay, I will take note for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sharifa. And then next question will be from Mr. Gangas from Constitutional Court.
Well, thank you, Ms. Nayu, as a moderator. Good morning, Dr. Andre Yuhel. My name is Gangas Wibisono, and I work at Constitutional Court of the Republic of Indonesia. It is intriguing to hear your session this morning because when you talk about AI, you don't only talk about the technical, but also the AI ethics and its implications for future governance. But what has been missing from your presentation for me is about the power. I mean, who after all this AI talks and AI ethics, digitals, and its appliance in future governance, who has the final say about the AI? Who has the power about its implication, about its continuity, or about its advanced systems, how it can be applied in some areas or some improvements can be done? Is it the governments? Is it the entrepreneur or the politicians? Because it is so important to note that it's in Indonesia we still have a digital gaps between the societies, and you cannot say that in Indonesia we have the same access to AI. It is an elite issues, and the advancement of AI has become what can be say as dangerous. It can divide the societies being left, and that leads me to the next questions. In your opinion, is AI have a chance to divide the societies? What about the question of fairness? The second issue of fairness, the structural exclusion being made of the advancement of AI. What can be done? Because yeah, I've heard a question about digital retina collection data being recently in Indonesia. The people out there doesn't have any ideas about data collections, let alone privacy rights. No, it's so far from their comprehension. So is AI going to deepen the structural exclusion, or what can be done to unite the societies in these areas? And
Yes.
the final question is, you're talking to fellow future leaders of civil servants in Indonesia. There are numbers of future leaders of civil governance, and this is a great opportunity for us to learn much about AI ethics concerning the AI. And what are your suggestions to us as the future leaders so we can apply the AI in what can we say as a right ways? Because I've read about Dr. Yuval Noah Harari, 21 Lessons for 21st century books, the famous book, that AI can sometimes lead us to doom to be without proper understanding of AI. What are your suggestions to us so we can improve the situations in public governance? Thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Andre.
Thank you. Very, very interesting questions. And let me begin with your last one. What is the right, thing to ask or consider if you want to be an emerging leader in the space? And I think it really has to do with understanding what is your identity as a community, as a society, as a region, as new technologies are being deployed globally and are also creating sort of what I like to call a monoculture, right? This ties directly into the question of power. When we talk about AI, these are platforms that are predominantly developed in certain regions of the world, right? And depending on how a regulatory environment is responding to this platform, it also then ultimately decides where the power lies, right? And we have seen that in the case of the European Union, which has established a very strict framework of how AI systems have to adhere to certain risk levels, right? And how AI systems will also be held accountable if a risk is being crossed. So suddenly here, the power, I would say, lies more in the regulatory landscape than in the AI platforms. In other regions that are having less of a clear governance framework, and especially one that's enforceable, it is easy that the power remains with the tech companies who are actually developing and deploying those tools. And this is getting even more complex in regions such as Indonesia, which are often relying also on AI platforms that come from other regions in the world, right? And here we are talking not only about digital divides, so people having access to this technology or not, but also even those who have access, they are taking advantage of platforms that were designed in a very different kind of social-cultural environment. So I want to, pose a question that is very interesting to me recently, is what it actually means to develop your own digital identity that can preserve also sort of the social fabric of your society in a way that doesn't diminish sort of the legacy of cultural heritage and the knowledge and ethical practices that are unique to your region. How can that be also transported into the age of AI in a way that is both meaningful and also secure? Yeah. And these are some of the, I think, areas to really think with in order to make sure that AI governance operates in a way that is fair and accountable.
Thank you, Dr. Andre.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to call Mr. Rafael from Transportation Ministry. Are you there?
Hello, I hope my voice is clear enough to hear.
Yes.
So thank you for your presentation earlier. It is really intriguing that we, especially in this era where AI is blooming even more. But regarding the boom of this AI, we do have several issues. The first thing is that we know that in Indonesia, which is a developing country, AI is currently mostly used in society as a shortcut to simplify how things work, in which you already mentioned before that of course, in academic, that what should I say? There are more and more scripts that are written using AI. And I think most that the society in Indonesia is using AI in a way that more bringing more negative impact. So I wanna know about from your point of view as a scholar, how to mitigate this.
That's a great question. And again, it starts with AI literacy, I would say. So instead of thinking about AI as a tool that can give you shortcuts, it's actually, the much harder work here is to think of the ways we need to rebuild our institutions and, sort of roles, positions that can, give us a meaning in a social life, in a way that it can also incorporate AI as a new dynamic in our everyday lives, right? AI has many transformative possibilities, and I mentioned that. It can also be transformative in creating new jobs in ways, and these might be jobs that, never existed before. But this also, again, it requires AI literacy, because only if you understand how these tools truly work, if you don't just see them as like this magical tool that can just, take care of any task that you would be doing as a human, only also if you understand what kind of black box it is and what it means to open that black box, then it is possible to create solutions that are both creative and responsible. And, sort of they will be sustainable in the long run. That would be my answer here. Indonesia is not the unique case. I think all around the world, we are seeing currently AI tools being used for certain shortcuts. Yet they will also make existing systems within which these tools are implemented, they will make these systems very unstable, because shortcuts are not the way that you can actually create a more solid foundation, right? So here it's again about broadening AI literacy, especially to populations who might be most vulnerable and at risk of being impacted by these tools.
Thank you for the answer. And then this leads to my second question. Given that the AI is being pioneered by the countries like mostly Americas and Europe's, I think, then what do you think about the implementation of norm, which is like a country in Indonesia which has diverse communities, is being implemented in training the AI itself?
Yes, I think this is a great idea. And if it is done in the appropriate framework, right? So there is a new idea emerging, what would actually need to happen in order to create a more decentralized network of localized AI models, right? That are trained by communities and also governed by those communities. So can you extend AI literacy to the extent that actually an AI model, would be basically a sort of a proprietary sort of component of a community, and they would decide how to govern the system itself. The data are not being shared sort of or leaked, but they are also kind of governed by the community. There are some interesting concepts emerging around federated AI ecosystems, right? And this is exactly the kind of work that I'm actually doing, and which also, is one of the reasons why I'm collaborating with some researchers in Bali, because we are trying to establish a fieldwork site there to understand what it would mean to build a localized AI models and help communities understand how to train and govern those. So it's a great question.
Thank you for the explanation, Andre.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. The committee give one or two more opportunities for the participants to raise question. And we have Mr. Duyan from Ministry of State and Enterprise.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mrs. Nayu, and good afternoon, Mr. Andre. Let me introduce myself. My name is Duyan, and I work at Ministry of State-owned Enterprise in Indonesia. Thank you for your insightful presentation. So, Singapore has made significant strides in integrating AI into its public sector through many strategic initiatives. But in contrast, many developing nations, include Indonesia, still exploring the foundational policies, skills, development, and digital infrastructure readiness to leverage the AI itself. So my question is, what the basic foundational steps should governments do to strengthen, robust, and create a sustainability, transparent, and accountable AI ecosystem, especially in developing countries? Thank you.
Yes, thanks for the question. I think we're exploring some similar sort of ideas from different perspectives, and it's really important. In the context of Indonesia, what I find especially interesting is that it is such a diverse country, right? There are so many different ethnic groups and languages being spoken, different value systems that are coexisting. And in that regard, I think it is really important also to establish platforms for public consultations in various parts of the country where you can also crowdsource values that might not currently be part of a global discourse, right? It is important to understand that the AI ethics conversation, it really emerged out of very specific regions, right? Or the so-called global north, basically. This is where it started in the United States and in Europe, in many regions that have a certain value system as well. And so those ethical principles that we explored are also closely tied to certain value assumptions, right? That might not hold equally true in different parts of the world, or that might be also interpreted very differently. So here my recommendation again would be to find ways to include the public in the consensus building, right? And to make sense of AI not only as a tool that experts should learn how to use or govern, but actually how it corresponds with public interests and public values. So what it is actually that we can think about, what is the unique identity of Indonesia as a nation with various value systems? How can that define a unique response to that also the public can also correspond to? We don't want to create sort of a separate structure where AI ethics becomes more like an elite concern, right? Where we are creating these high-level tools or governance structures that have little to do with what people believe on the ground. So I actually think crowdsourcing values in order to find appropriate governance mechanisms is an important step to finding your own approach to AI governance.
Thank you. Hopefully AI in Indonesia can keep the human rights and will not reduce or not erode the critical thinking of humans, especially in Indonesia. Thank you once again, Mr. Andre.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We still have 2 more questions. It's Mr. Anjar from Civil Service.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear my voice, Miss Nayu?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. 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 Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Andre. I'm Anjar from BKN. Okay, maybe this question is off topic, but I'm really curious about your opinion. My question is about USA versus People's Republic of China in AI technology. In your opinion, as an US citizen, where will this rivalry go and end? Because I see this is a repeat of the Cold War, more and less, very similar to the space race between USA versus Soviet Union in 20th century. And also, as developing countries, Indonesia will be affected to some extent, including in the bureaucratic sector. Hope you can answer my question.
So you're asking for my opinion about who will win the AI race, or what would you like to know from me?
Maybe the impact of this rivalries, in your opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
this is about geopolitical questions.
Yes. The impact, this is a really interesting question because it cuts kind of at the core of today's topic. AI ethics as a discipline has been heavily shaped by the United States, actually, by many academics and technologists who wanted to create spaces to think more critically about these technologies. And so over the years, we have also seen the public sector actually responding to that by creating also platforms and positions and funding that would allow for those critical spaces to happen. Yet what I think I mentioned that before, if we are looking into the ethics of AI, and if we want to be very mindful about how these technologies are actually creating potential harm before it occurs, and to kind of anticipate that harm and find measures to mitigate it, it also slows us down, right? And so somehow it is almost contradictory to think about ethics and this kind of arms race, because at some point there will be this friction where you need to kind of, choose between one or the other. And this is especially significant, not only for the impact on human and societies, but also for the environment, as I mentioned, because the more data we collect, the more advanced AI models we create, the larger the environmental footprint will be, unless we are prioritizing to develop AI systems that actually can help us mitigate the environmental crisis. So these are all choices that need to be made. But usually what happens in an arms race, regardless of whether who wins and who loses, is that there are different priorities at stake, right? And these priorities usually include how fast can we scale to have the maximum impact, right? And so my field is quite concerned, actually, that currently two of the major players in AI development that there is kind of an emphasis on acceleration. Although I want to emphasize that there are many people in both regions that are actually also concerned, like they are working hard to also consider ethics in the implementation. So it's not just a black or white issue. Yeah.
Thank you for your answer, sir. I hope this thing is make a positive impact for this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ul. We have very interesting question from Siva. Is the correlation between AI and indigenous people? So please, Ms. Siva, you can deliver your question.
Okay, hello, Mr. Andre. Greetings from Banten Province. I'm Siva. So my question is, in Banten Province, there is an indigenous group called Baduy people. They choose to reject the most form of modern technology, including electricity, cars, and mobile phone, in order to protect their traditional way of life and spiritual beliefs. So as AI becomes the more common, how can we ensure that this community are respected and not forced to change while still being given equal right and opportunities to be included in the national development? Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate this question. As I have been sharing already, some of the more recent concerns that have emerged in the space of AI ethics that relate to the environmental impact, right? What we can be clear about is that there is no community who will not be impacted by AI, but the impact are very differently. So even communities who deliberately and intentionally choose to disengage with the use of digital technology might still feel the consequences through the environmental changes that are being exacerbated, right? Through increasingly large AI systems and infrastructures that have a large environmental footprint. And this is especially complex because indigenous communities are particularly related to a land through intergenerational ties. And there's a very intimate relationship to the environment. So what we have seen also in this discourse is that indigenous communities are usually the first to ring the alarm when environmental change happens, because there is a much more nuanced engagement with the environment. And in many regions in the world, they are also becoming the leaders in environmental action, right? So this is just sort of on the side note that actually the impact of AI is felt across all of humanity, regardless of whether you choose to use it or not. Yes, to your question, how these communities can be protected, right? I think actually it is a really important question to include whether or not the use of AI actually makes sense. And in that way, these communities that you're describing could be actually some of the thought leaders or role models Because what we are seeing currently in AI governance, even in the space of ethics, is that there's a little consideration about what kind of use contexts actually could allow us to decide, no, the use of AI does not make sense. We do not use AI in this context, right? Usually the conversation focuses more on how can we make AI more ethical? So the use is already kind of a given. It is non-negotiable. And that also that involves sort of an idea that the future is already determined, that the future includes AI no matter what. But what if we could also look at those communities and think about ways how we can always create sort of a deeper question? What are the areas where the use of AI makes sense, and what areas should we rather refrain from using them because it creates more harm than benefits? Yeah,
Okay,
so
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is one more bonus from the committee. Please, Mr. Mehdi Nugroho. Hello. Hello, Mr. Mehdi. Okay, there is no answer. I think we need to give the last opportunity to Yasid. Mr. Yasid, are you there?
Hello. Yeah, so
Yes.
I apologize in advance because my camera has a minor damage, so I cannot open my camera for this moment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your change. Thank you so much for your well-hearted presentation. So my question is about, if we're talking about the artificial intelligence development, I think one of the challenges in Indonesia is about the lack of the clear regulation regarding to AI usage itself. So which often leads to misuse by certain individuals to engage in unlawful activities. So actually this question is about, in your opinion, how should the government oversee the AI usage in Indonesia? And the second question is about the 69.3% of Indonesians are concerned about the AI's impact on data security and the privacy. And furthermore, it also concerned about the lack of the public understanding about it, whereas it causes the skepticism about AI itself. So the question is, if we're talking about the artificial intelligence, I believe that artificial intelligence is not about the bad thing, whereas the many positive thing that can we take from artificial intelligence. So the question is, as a people really aware about this issue, how we can encourage the people so they can have a good mindset about the artificial intelligence itself. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a great question, maybe to wrap the session up with. And this is where we are ending at the concept of public trust, right? How can we actually foster trust? And that plays exactly into these principles that were outlined. I think if we are not able to explain how these systems work exactly, and how also, for example, individual data are being contained and used and protected potentially, if we cannot explain that, then we can also not expect the public to have trust in the technology, right? I think it is not a unique case what you're just sharing. Around the world, people are very uneasy with what is happening right now. There is a low trust in technology such as AI, precisely because they are operating in ways that are hard to scrutinize. So in this regard, again, it has a lot to do with kind of finding ways to explain, how you are adopting ethical considerations in order to prioritize the experience and the well-being of the end users over the technology. And that needs to have easily translatable explanations that are, understandable to various aspects of the population. These cannot be only highly technical explanations. They need to be translated also into cultural narratives, right? And then lastly, it is also about finding clear mechanisms that can hold these systems accountable, right? Sort of where actually do you create measures that when something is happening that is unexpected and it causes harm, where can then the end user turn to report either that there is an error, that they are, being mistreated by an AI system's decision, and also where can a user be guaranteed that something can be done about it? So these are all some kind of practical ways how especially public sectors can create channels that make the use of AI more transparent, so that the technology doesn't only remain a black box, but it's becoming a tool of empowerment in a way. It starts with literacy.
Okay, thank you, sir. Finish it will answer.
Okay, thank you. We finally made our last session of this webinar. It's a concluding remark. However, we need to remind all the audience to open video because we're going to take a documentation. I need help from the committee to take a picture from one slide to next slides.
Oh,
Thank
wow.
you very much. Yeah, please,
Picture.
Dr. Oil. Yes, we're gonna make a memorable picture of this today's webinar. With the
Absolutely.
committee, we can start now. Give the best smile. Okay, I think it's enough. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Dr. Oil.
Yes,
This
again,
is
I hope to see many of you in the future. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions to follow up with. If you want to find out more about the program that we are launching in Bali later this year, this will be a fantastic opportunity to continue the conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for your information. We still have 7 questions left that I'm really sorry for the shortcoming of this time limitation, ladies and gentlemen, but you can still drop your questions in the chat box if it's necessary, or you can send the question to the committee, and we'll follow back to the Dr. Yu. Okay, is that okay?
Yes,
Or
absolutely.
maybe they can meet you in person when you go to Bali.
Yes.
Yes.
So our project manager, Fabrina, just dropped her email address in the chat box. So if anybody would like to follow up and get more information, be put on our mailing list, please reach out to her, and then we'll make sure that we can meet each other in person later this year.
Okay. Thank you. I think I need to hand over the opportunity back to the MC. Thank you very much, everyone, for active participation, opinions, feedbacks. We finally have clear understanding about the historical development of AI, the debate, the practices of AI, also the impacts of AI in our daily life. Also, what should we do as public civil servant to make collaboration and also to support the policymaking process in not only digital governance sector, but also democratic governance, also sustainable development. I think that's a key word. Not only try to level up the effectiveness, the efficiency, but also the human right side of the AI deployment. Thank you very much once again, and I'm really sorry for any shortcoming from me, all the committees. I would like to hand over the opportunity back to the MC.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Nayu, and also Professor, I'm sorry, Dr. Andre. Well, we have followed all session of the webinar today. Sincerely, thanks a lot to Mr. Andre and also to Mrs. Nayu for the sharing and discussion. That was very interesting and useful for us today. And of course, thanks a bunch to all participants of the ASN Talent Academy 2025 and all parties that helped in organizing today's event. So for the next webinar series will be held on May 15, 2025, and it will be announced through our social media. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm Fanny Bravita. I take my leave from this webinar room. See you at the next webinar series. Good afternoon and thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the moment. See you next week. Bye.
So much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.